I'm curious here, when you think about younger people today, what labels do we hear or what labels do we use to describe them? I've heard they're lazy. What else? A number of very quiet ones. You can shout them out a little louder. They're speaking binary. Great. Irresponsible, what? They expect things immediately or at once. They move too quickly. Any other labels toward a younger generation? Entitled, enthusiastic. Yes. This was from Time magazine several years ago. This was about millennials, the me generation. Millennials are lazy, entitled narcissists. But then the subtitle was Why They'll Save Us All. Right? So there's a mixed perspective on younger generations. Some of them hopeful, some of them fear-based, which is why it's so important that we're responding with empathy. Now, you'll see on page 18 at the top, it says this: when we talk about empathy, we mean feeling with young people. In other words, it's sitting on the curb of a young person's life, celebrating their dreams and grieving over their despair. Okay, so empathy, it's the ability to feel with someone else. Whether you've taken the assessment or you have yet to take the assessment, what we see from the vast majority of churches, their lowest score of the 6 areas tends to be in empathy. What that means is we're doing all of these things, and we may be doing some of them well, but if we can't relate to or connect with someone who's different from us, whether they're different by age, they're different by their culture, they're different by the party that they vote for, whatever way they're different from us, it's hard to follow Jesus together if we can't actually understand or step in to someone else's shoes. Brene Brown, who's a well-known author on the topic of empathy, shame, guilt, she writes this: empathy drives connection, or empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. What we're not talking about is having sympathy for a younger generation, right? That would look like this. It's, oh, younger person, your life is so hard. I'm going to kind of pat you on the head. Isn't that nice? That's sympathy. What we're talking about, empathy, is the ability to see or step into the world and connect with someone who's different from you. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to talk about what empathy looks like. Before I do that, I want to show you what empathy looks like. This is a video filmed in one of the churches that we included in our study called Fellowship Memphis. You're going to meet 2 young women, Natalie and Jazzy. Natalie is the younger woman here. Jazzy is a few years older than her, and I want you to look at what their relational journey looked like in the church. And then we'll talk about what empathy means.
Discipleship was not a word that I heard growing up. No one said, oh, I disciple so-and-so. We just kind of did it. The Lord was pushing me to started learning the message of discipleship. Kind of felt like a burning bush experience where the Lord was like, it's time to start passing that on. So the next question is like, oh, well, great, to who?
My family had come to fellowship when I was in the 7th grade, and they put me in a youth group. And I didn't like youth group because I'm an old church. I was the only black kid in my youth group. I didn't want to feel singled out. I had the worst attitude. I didn't want to be there.
We were all in this tiny room, 4 middle school, high school girls, and I barely know any of them. I thought, all right, there could be a divine appointment in this room. So I'm just going to keep praying, and I'm going to wait. I'm going to let God speak. And I kid you not, there was one in the room who was like, not having anything artificial.
And she sat beside me, and I was like, who is this woman? Like, why is she here? Like, she's 20-something, and she keeps talking to us and wants to be like our Sunday school teacher, but it's not even Sunday school. But she, like, had this gentle, like, persistence about her that I didn't notice.
That night, I just started dreaming of this young girl. Sometimes we were going on walks, sometimes we were going on runs, sometimes we were sitting around at a table, and I thought, okay, I'm gonna ask her to coffee because 13-year-olds like coffee.
I was 13, 14, didn't drink coffee. I was like, I mean, I guess. I don't have nothing else to do. Are you gonna pick me up?
I knew it was an obedient move. I want to have it all together, but Lord, I don't know what's next. I'm sitting at coffee with a 13-year-old. I don't know what to say. It's like, just pursue an honest conversation. Just talk to her.
I remember she asked me a question about like someone's relationship in the youth group. I think they're gonna break up. And usually, if I talk to an adult like that about another adult, the adult would say like, well, you don't know anything, like you're just a little girl, or like that's rude, how do you know? But she didn't say that to me. She kind of had a conversation with me about what I had just said, and it wasn't a conversation of like correction, it was just a conversation between a person and a person. I mean, when you're 13 and you're in school and you have parents and everyone's older than you and telling you what to do, but then this one person comes into your life and like, here's what you say. I'm really emotional, but that like melted my heart. And I think that gave like she could have said anything to me after that and I would have heard her. So I mean, she calls me her sister, we're sisters.
People are not projects. We started sitting down and meeting. We were for sure going to see each other on Sundays, but all of a sudden, a project didn't emerge. There wasn't this point where I go, okay, I'm discipling you and you're my disciple. It expanded what I really think that God meant for discipleship to be. This has been the one thing where I feel that I've been blessed in every way. She's a gift, she's a little sister. It's just meant the world to me.
See people as people. Don't come with all the answers and all the help, but have a conversation with someone and taking things slow and looking at people as if they're royalty, because they are. Treat people like people, like they're your friend, and actually mean it in your heart.
So I'm curious, based on that video, what does empathy look like in the church? This is a real question, not just hypothetical. What does empathy look like in the church? I'd love for a couple people to respond to that. Authenticity. Yeah. Friendship. What else? Relating to each other. Being sincere. Praying together, and there's another one. Yeah. The point being, well, before that, let me ask this. Are any of those new things? Right? That's just like the latest thing in how to grow your church, right? No, these are just part of what it means to be human. And what we discovered in the churches that we researched was a whole lot of young people and other generations saying it feels like the church has lost a little bit of its ability to relate, just to be human and normal and authentic. And I want to go back to a lot of the young people we found who are leaving churches are not leaving the church because it's too challenging or it looks too much like Jesus. A lot of young people were saying things like the opposite of this. So in the video, Jazzy said, people are not projects. A lot of the young people we talked to who had left churches said things like, I feel like I'm just a project to them. I feel like they just want me to show up and look Adventist and dress Adventist and marry an Adventist, right? Some of you are feeling that tension, right? But they said, many times they said, I feel like they don't really know me, and I'm not sure they actually care about me and who I really am. Part of what comes out of this then that we're inviting you into is don't assume that you know what's going on with a different generation. Some of you are feeling your heyday represented here, right? Some of you who are on the more, we'll call it the more seasoned side of life, right? The more seasoned side of life. We think for some of us, we need to eliminate this phrase from our vocabulary, when I was your age. When I was your age. Sometimes that statement is an opening to empathy. Just as often, this phrase is kind of shutting down conversation. Well, when I was your age, we knew how to act or talk or show up to church. I want to briefly bring you into the reality for today's young adults, or whether this is the teenagers or children in your church, the world that they are coming into. Here's a math equation that helps us get at it. Plus 5 years, plus options, minus relational support equals 28 is the new 18. Okay, this is in your packet. We can fill in those blanks. Plus 5 years, plus options, minus relational support equals 28 is the new 18. In Western countries broadly, what the research reveals is that on average, young people are getting married, are having kids, and getting settled into typical adult life decisions about 5 years later than they used to. Now, I know the data for the U.S. is that a generation or so ago, it was age 22, age 23 that someone was married and had kids. Today, you fast forward, and that's about age 28 or 29 if they get married and have kids at all. You had options. It's not just you're going to go into the career that your mom or dad or grandpa or grandma went into. It's you might go to university, you might have all of these options that you're going to pursue, and that most of that is happening without relational support. The result is that it simply takes longer for today's young people to quote unquote grow up. Now, if you didn't follow that math, maybe it wasn't your strong suit in school, or you could use a visual. Here's another way to say the same thing. This is a picture of what it's looked like to grow up in a previous generation. Now, when I say a picture, any picture can only represent so many things. So this is really kind of a middle class sort of picture. I recognize this isn't the case for everyone, but for a decent percentage of the population, here's a picture of what it looked like to grow up. Now, we'd start out in school. At some point, we might go to either college or university. If we don't go to university, we might go into the workforce or the military. After that, we'd get a job. After getting a job, we'd get married. After getting married, we'd have kids. Now, again, the reason or the most important phrase in there was after that, because we assumed that there was a bit of an order in which society would flow. And while this isn't the case for all of us, a generation or two ago, this describes, for many of us, the process of becoming an adult. Let me show you a better picture of what it looks like to grow up in today's society. Are you ready? Keep your picture, or keep your eyes on the world as it was. Here's the world as it is now. For those under age 30, does this feel like it describes anybody's life? Yeah, a number of us. For anybody over age 30, does this feel like it describes the world of your kids or grandkids, and it just frustrates you so much? Some of us, right? The point that I want to draw out is when we quoted Scott Cormode, who we're building up, because you're going to get to hear more from him in a little bit. When Scott says the world, that the church is calibrated for a world that doesn't exist, many of our churches have been designed for this world right here. Our systems, our structures, the time that our services meet, how you step into leadership. Many of our churches have been designed for this world here. Younger generations today are not necessarily living in this world, they're living in this world. And even though they want to follow Jesus, they want to be part of church, they're actually open to God. Many of them are finding that the structure and flow and culture and structures of our church just doesn't fit the world as they know it. So this can lead us to things like saying, well, we tried keychain leadership. We offered a bunch of positions to young people, but they didn't take them, so I don't think this whole thing works, and we're just going to move on, right? If we don't have empathy within the process, if there isn't this connection to individual people and to the world around us, we continue to move into ways of ministry that are out of date, that are out of touch, and simply aren't working. In the midst of that, right, with everything that makes us different between generations, we think there are three big questions that every person in our church is asking. They're questions of identity, belonging, and purpose. Questions of identity are questions like this: who am I? This is also in your packet should you want to fill these in. Questions of belonging: where do I fit? Questions of purpose: what difference do I make? Now, we think that all people in our church are asking these big questions about their identity, their belonging, and their purpose. What we tend to find is that today's young people who are in that world that is twisting, that is turning, where there is no easy path to follow, are asking those questions with a sense of heat, with a sense of pressure behind them to figure out who they are and what they're doing. And what we see in the midst of that is that many of our young people end up coming up with false answers to life's biggest questions. They come up with false answers to life's biggest questions. Here's some examples. When they ask questions about who they are, often the world responds with, you are defined by shame. You're defined by those ways you don't measure up, that you are not enough. That oftentimes for our young people today, when they think about where do I fit, by society or the world, they receive answers of conditional acceptance. You belong as long as you do what we do. When they ask, what difference do I make? It's met with answers of self-fulfillment. Do whatever makes you happy, might make you the most money. We would say, where better than the church, that when young people are asking big questions, where better than the church for young people to get the best answers to their deepest questions? What if, because we're a Jesus-centered community, when young people ask these questions, here's the answers they receive from the church. Who am I? I'm defined by the grace of Jesus Christ. When young people ask, where do I fit? The church responds with, you fit within the love, the unconditional love of Christian community. When young people ask, what difference do I make? The church responds with, you were designed for participation in God's mission, that there's a God doing something much bigger in the world that you can be a part of. A different way to say this is that the better story always wins. And what we find in today's young people is, like all generations, young people are searching for a story that they want to be a part of. We think this is a moment for the church to reflect on the story that they are inviting young people into. We wholeheartedly believe that the church has the best, most complete, compelling story to live out. It's called the gospel, or the good news of Jesus Christ. The unfortunate reality is there are a lot of young people today, they are finding more compelling stories out there, wherever out there is, rather than in here. We think that for many young people, they're leaving or drifting from church, not because the church is providing the best, most compelling answers to their questions, but a lot of young people find churches aren't actually pursuing life's deepest questions. We've kind of got tunnel vision. We've closed our eyes to what's happening around us. So what do we do about that? Well, let me give us a few steps to get started. I'll conclude with this in the next couple of minutes, so those who are sharing in a second, if you can be on deck to do that. We found that there's at least 3 barriers to developing empathy in the church. And if some of you at this point are starting to feel like these are pretty heavy, weighty topics, right? Like this is bigger than just youth ministry, I want to go back to that point that I made earlier. This process of growing young or growing together, it's not just about changing youth ministry. This is, in fact, about changing our overall church culture. And we're going to guide you in this process. This is why you're not just part of a 2-day conference. You're getting into this year-long journey, is to guide you through this. The barriers that we've seen to empathy. The first one is this: vision. A lot of our churches, we just don't have a picture of what a vision of what does it look like for us to live out empathy. We found this can be a powerful phrase. When it comes to young people, we don't judge, we journey with. When it comes to young people, we don't judge, we journey with. I go back to thinking about the early days of the Adventist church. And I believe we said the 1860s. Do I have that right? And if the Adventist church at that point looked at some young people who were voicing some dissatisfaction, wanted things to be different, judged them and said, nope, and it wouldn't have been the Adventist church, it would have been It's the Millerites. I'm not going to try my Adventist history at this point. But if the existing church at that point had just dismissed the young people, right, and said, you've got crazy ideas, those don't fit here. No, the early founders of Adventism chose to journey with a group of young people to listen to what was happening with them, and we're all here because of it. The second idea is around skills. We think that many of those in our pews, many of our members just need practical skills to connect with younger people. We found that this is a powerful phrase, tell me more. That when you're confused, when you're frustrated, when you don't understand what's happening with a young person, that your default response is to say, tell me more. It's to keep the conversation going. The last idea is this around time. Where do young people show up on your calendar? If you're a more seasoned leader, I mean that very practically. If you're saying, I wish we had more young people who are part of our church, one of the first questions we'd say back to you is take a look at your calendar. How and where do you actually interact with young people? If you're the senior or lead pastor of your church, might it be possible that once a month you're going to share a meal, a lunch, or a dinner with some young adults simply to hear their perspective and where they're coming from? But often for individuals or churches, it's a question of where are young people showing up on your calendar, where are you spending time with them, is the entryway to connecting with them. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to local sites for each site to have, and local hosts to share, move into an example of what empathy looks like in context. So let's now.
We'll always let Jake have the final word. I'd like to welcome Amy Turner. I almost called you Townend yet again, but Amy Turner on stage with me. Amy is here today in her capacity as a Carmel Church member, where I'm also a member of my local church at Carmel. So, yeah. Amy also serves as our assistant youth director for the conference as well. But Amy, I've invited you up to share about a new initiative at Carmel Church that's just in its beginning phases, and it's very linked to empathy. And we're hoping that you can share about the bookmarks with us.
So as Jake shared, obviously empathy with young people is about connecting, and mentoring is something that really covers a lot of the components in growing young, but certainly connects with empathizing with young people. So Carmel Church has recognised that as something that they really want to do within the church community. So last year, the nominating committee asked Lucy and myself whether we'd be able to put together a little bit of a scope and sequence of how we can roll out a mentoring program within our church. And there's a few different elements to that, and we're rolling that out slowly. But the first one that we've started with is actually quite small. It's a small initiative, but the purpose is that it's intentional and it's supposed to create maximum participation through all church members, and that is our mentoring/prayer bookmark. So basically, in short, what that is that every adult within Carmel Church who wants to be involved will receive a bookmark. And that bookmark will have the name, date of birth, age, and the name of parents of every young person within our church. So that is kids all the way, in our beginners Sabbath school, right up until youth. So all our children and young people within our church. And those adults will have that bookmark. The idea is that they have it in their Bible so they can see it for like daily devotional time. And the idea is that they are to pray for that child every single day. And not only are they to pray for that child every day, but the intent is that on Sabbath, they are to make a pointed connection with that child using their name. There's actually a lot of power in just actually using a child's name to their face. So whatever that connection is, maybe it's with the little kids, just like a high five and, happy Sabbath or whatever it is. And maybe with the older ones, like he was talking about, having those actual real conversations. The bookmarks are in print at the moment, so unfortunately I don't have a copy to share with you. But on my phone, I just wanted to read out what it says on our bookmark, just to give you a little bit of an idea. And if you'd like, you can come and see it afterwards, but it is at the printers at the moment. So just on the front, it has a passage from Ephesians chapter 1, verses 16 that says, "I have not stopped thanking God for you, and I pray for you constantly." And then on the back it says, "Dear Jesus, help me to see young people and their families with your eyes. I commit to praying, connecting and affirming." And then it has a space for the name, date and birth, and the parents' names. Now, then at the bottom, you'll notice that Jake talked about how every young person is really on a quest of identity, belonging and purpose. And so we've intentionally used those words at the bottom. And it says, "May they find identity in Jesus, belonging in the church and purpose in your mission. Amen." So that's what the bookmark has on it. And so as I mentioned, the purpose of this is, number one, so there's awareness within Carmel Church of who our young people are and their names, that hopefully it will create those intergenerational organic relationships in church on a week-to-week basis, and also prayer. Like, I think a church that is praying for their young people, that is really exciting. And I'm a mum of 3 little ones, and for me to think about my little boys being prayed for every single day, and for Scott and myself as parents, that warms my heart so much. And I think there's so much power in prayer, and I can't wait to see what God's going to do when we start really intentionally praying for our children and our young people within our church. And just as a real quick side note, so we had sign-up sheets in the foyers for this, so adults could sign up and say, "I'd like to receive a bookmark." And the intent was that parents would sign up their children and have their name and age and all that kind of stuff, and then young people could do the same. But what I loved is on the Sabbath that we first launched this, when I went out into the foyer, the table that had the sign-up sheet was surrounded by kids signing up their own names. And I absolutely loved that, because it shows that they want this. Like, they were 10, 12, 13, 14, 15-year-olds signing up their own names. This is my name, my date of birth. They want to be prayed for, and they want those connections. And if that doesn't give reason as to why we need to be having these connections, then I don't know what else does, because I think that's pretty cool in itself. So there you go.
Yeah, it's so exciting. Thank you for sharing it, Amy. We're now going to hear a very short clip from Jake just talking about team time. I'm sorry that we missed this earlier, but hopefully this gives you a little bit more detail about team time. Then straight after this video, jump into your team time. I'll get those lights up for you as well, and then we'll shortly break for morning tea.
I also was calling Brett, your conference president here, Brent. My apologies. We'll just chalk it up to the accent and the jet lag. So there you go. I've apologized many times. He still looks kind of angry, but no, he looks nice. He looks nice. I got invited back from last year. That's my goal, is to come back again in a year. I just want to set up your team time briefly. If you look at page 17, we want to make sure that you're not in church conference mindset for this training. Okay, the reason we don't call it a conference, we call it a cohort, is because we really want to break you out of church conference mindset. If you've been to a church conference before, they're wonderful, but here's how it tends to go from my experience. You soak in a lot of information. It goes in your pamphlet, it goes in your head. You have all of these ideas for what you're going to do, and then you go back to your church and very little changes or happens. So what we're going to do for each of these core commitments is we will give you some content like we just did. We'll talk about the research. We'll talk about some ideas for what that looks like in practice. But then we're going to give you between 20 and 25 minutes with your team to talk about what we do next. So I'm going to set up that team time briefly, and then we'll let you know what to do next. So on page 17, there's 3 questions for every core commitment. The first question is this: how do we understand or interpret this core commitment in our context? In essence, what that means is this: what does keychain leadership mean for us? Yeah, we talked about it on stage, but what does it mean for us? Question number 2, based on our experience, how are we doing in this area and why? So we do want you as a team to talk about how are you actually doing in the area of keychain leadership. And then number 3, what is a short-term and or a long-term next step that we can take in this area? We actually want you to have thought through what's a next step we could take when we get back to our church. That way, when you get to the end of these 2 days, you're going to have a whole list of ideas of things you can do immediately when you go back to your church. 2 final pieces on that. You have hopefully taken the Growing Young assessment at this point. If you're thinking, Growing Young assessment, what is that? That's probably another point where later turn to your team leader and say, team leader, what have we missed, right? And your team leader can either go to your coach or to Alina as your cohort director. Essentially, we've created this online assessment tool for you. This online assessment tool is made so that you don't have to guess about how you're doing. It will actually give you information. If you've ever taken StrengthsFinder or like a Disney Princess quiz, it's like one of those, except a little bit more robust than the Disney Princess quiz. It will give you somewhere to start your discussion. If you have not done that yet, we would love for you to do it over these 2 days, or at the very least, do it shortly after this summit so that you have that data. I mentioned your coaches in this process because every church has been assigned a coach, and during this team time or on a break would be a wonderful time to invite your coach to come and talk with you. They can help guide you, share ideas. Most of them have been through something like this before. What I want to do is invite local cohort directors up, so Lucy in Perth and Alina here in Brisbane, to explain who your coaches are, and then we will go into about 20 minutes of team time. So can you give Lucy or Alina a hand, please?
Thank you.
Thanks for bearing with us, folks. This is now your team time. I'm actually going to be introducing our coaches a little later. So enjoy your team time now, and I will let you know when morning tea is ready.